She kept her past hidden for 3 years, but when anonymous videos of her dancing at a gentleman's club landed in his inbox just 2 weeks before their wedding, his world shattered. The shocking truth behind her lies will leave you speechless. Watch until the end. Subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The envelope sat on my desk for 3 days before I finally found the courage to open it. Unmarked except for my name scrawled in handwriting I didn't recognize. No return address. Just James written in bold black letters that seemed to stare back at me every time I walked past. I told myself it was probably junk mail, maybe a prank from one of my groomsmen, or perhaps an early wedding gift from a forgetful relative who didn't know proper etiquette. With only 2 weeks until my wedding day, I had far more important things to worry about than mysterious envelopes. If only I had thrown it away unopened. But on that Friday afternoon, after a particularly stressful meeting with our wedding venue coordinator, I came home to an empty apartment, poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey, and finally tore open the seal. Inside was a USB drive, nothing else. No note, no explanation. Just a small black stick that held secrets that would shatter everything I thought I knew about Vanessa, the woman I had planned to spend the rest of my life with. I stared at it for a long moment, hesitating. Something about it felt ominous, like opening Pandora's box. Some part of me knew that whatever was on that drive would change something. But curiosity won, as it always does. I plugged it into my laptop and watched as a single video file appeared on the screen. The file name was simply vtruthmp4. With another swig of whiskey to steady my nerves, I clicked play. The video quality was grainy at first, clearly taken on an older phone or camera. But as the image clarified, my stomach dropped. It was Vanessa. Unmistakably her, though with longer hair and wearing more makeup than I had ever seen her wear. But it wasn't just seeing her that stopped my heart. It was where she was, what she was doing. The woman I had proposed to 1 year ago, the kindergarten teacher who blushed when I told dirty jokes, the same woman who had insisted we wait until marriage before moving in together because of her traditional values, was dancing on a stage in an outfit that left nothing to the imagination, collecting dollar bills from men who were reaching for her in ways that made my blood run cold. The timestamp on the video showed it was from 4 years ago. We had been dating for just over 3 years, which meant this was shortly before we met. The video went on for almost 20 minutes, showing multiple performances. In one segment, she disappeared with a customer toward a back area, returning 15 minutes later with mussed hair and smudged lipstick. I watched the entire thing, feeling numb, then immediately played it again, searching for any sign that it wasn't really her, that this was some elaborate, cruel hoax. But there was no denying it. The birthmark on her left shoulder, the small scar on her thigh from a childhood bicycle accident she had told me about on our 3rd date. The way she moved, the shape of her smile, even if that smile was directed at men who were nothing like me. By the time the video ended for the 2nd time, my whiskey glass was empty, and I felt hollow inside. Not just because of what I had seen, but because of what it meant. Vanessa had lied to me. For our entire relationship, she had hidden this part of her past. The woman who had cried when I suggested we move in together before marriage, who had built our relationship on a foundation of honesty and traditional values, had a secret life that contradicted everything she had presented herself to be. I sat there for hours, the empty screen glowing in the darkening room as night fell. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I just sat and thought about the 3 years we had spent together. Every conversation replayed in my mind, now tainted with doubt. What else had she lied about? Who was this woman I had asked to marry me? My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Vanessa, cheerful updates about wedding details, a selfie of her with her mother shopping for last-minute accessories. A sweet, "I love you, can't wait to be your wife" text that would have warmed my heart just hours before, but now felt like words from a stranger. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I poured another drink and made a call to someone who might have answers. Jackson, my cousin and best man, who had introduced me to Vanessa at his company party 3 years ago. "Hey man, what's up?" Jackson answered, the sound of a sports game playing in the background. "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "About Vanessa." There was a pause, the background noise suddenly muted. "What about her? Did you know she used to be a dancer at a club?" The extended silence that followed told me everything I needed to know even before he spoke. "Who told you that?" "So you knew." It wasn't a question, he sighed heavily. "Look, James, that was before you guys met, way before. She was in a tough spot financially after her dad got sick. It wasn't a big deal, and it wasn't my place to tell you about her past." "Not a big deal," I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She's been lying to me for 3 years, Jackson, acting like she's this innocent, traditional woman. She told me she had only been with 2 guys before me. She made me wait 6 months before we even slept together because she wanted to be sure about us. She insisted we couldn't live together before marriage because of her values, and all that time, she was hiding this completely different life. That wasn't her life, man. It was a job, a temporary situation she was in, and from what I understand, she wasn't doing anything more than dancing." The image of her returning from the back room flashed in my mind. "That's not what the video shows." "What video, James? Who sent you something?" "I don't know, anonymous." "But it doesn't matter who sent it. What matters is what's on it. And what's on it is proof that the woman I was going to marry in 2 weeks has been lying to my face since the day we met." Jackson was quiet for a moment. "Look, I get why you're upset, but people have pasts, man, things they're not proud of. Things they want to leave behind. You can't judge her entire character based on something she did during a desperate time in her life before she even knew you. It's not about what she did, Jackson. It's about the lie. If she had told me from the beginning, maybe it would have been different. But she deliberately created this image of herself that wasn't real. How am I supposed to trust anything about her now?" "By talking to her," he said simply. "Instead of sitting there drinking and talking to me, you should be having this conversation with your fiancée." I knew he was right, but the thought of facing her, of hearing more lies or excuses, was too much to bear at that moment. "I need time to think." "Don't do anything stupid, James, seriously. Talk to her before you make any decisions you might regret." I ended the call without promising anything. My phone continued to light up with messages from Vanessa, now taking on a more concerned tone as my silence stretched on. "Is everything okay? You're not responding. James, are you all right? Please text me back, I'm getting worried. I just called your office and they said you left hours ago. Where are you? Please call me." I turned off my phone and poured another drink. The rational part of my brain knew I should talk to her, hear her side of the story. But another part, the part hurt by the deception, wanted to make her feel the same confusion and betrayal I was feeling now. By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to marry her, not because of her past, but because of the deception. A marriage built on such a fundamental lie couldn't survive. I turned my phone back on to find 27 missed calls and a flurry of increasingly panicked messages from Vanessa, her mother, and even my own parents, who she had apparently contacted in her worry. I texted her one line, "We need to talk. Come to my apartment at noon." Her response was immediate, "Thank God. Are you okay? I've been so worried. I'll be there. I love you." Those last 3 words felt hollow now. I didn't respond. When the doorbell rang at exactly 12, I had prepared what I wanted to say. I had rehearsed it over and over in my mind. Calm, rational, decisive. I would tell her what I had discovered, explain why the deception meant we couldn't move forward, and ask her to be the one to notify the guests that the wedding was off since she was the reason for the cancellation. But when I opened the door and saw her standing there, all my practiced words evaporated. Her face was pale with worry, eyes red-rimmed from what looked like a sleepless night. She wore a simple sundress, the one she had been wearing when I proposed to her a year ago by the lake where we had our first date. "James," she whispered, stepping forward to embrace me. I stepped back, maintaining the distance between us. The hurt and confusion that flashed across her face almost made me waver, but then I remembered the video. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice small as she stood uncertainly in the doorway. "You disappear, don't answer my calls all night, and then send me this cryptic message. I've been imagining the worst. Are you sick? Did something happen with your family?" "Come in," I said, my voice controlled despite the storm raging inside me. "There's something you need to see." I led her to the living room where my laptop sat open, the video paused on a frame that clearly showed her face. Her sharp intake of breath told me she recognized what it was immediately. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Someone sent it to me, anonymously." "Does it matter?" She sank onto the couch, her legs seemingly unable to support her any longer. "James, I can explain." "Explain what, Vanessa? Explain how you've been pretending to be someone you're not for our entire relationship. Explain how you made me believe you were this innocent, traditional woman when really you were." I couldn't finish the sentence. "When really I was what?" Her voice had an edge to it now. "A woman who had to make difficult choices during a difficult time in her life. Is that what you were going to say? You lied to me. For 3 years you lied about who you were." "I never lied about who I am," she shot back, rising to her feet. "I lied about what I did for a few months of my life when I was desperate and didn't have other options. There's a difference." "A few months. The timestamp on that video is from 4 years ago. How long were you really doing this?" She closed her eyes briefly. "About a year. My dad got sick. His insurance wouldn't cover the treatments he needed. My teaching salary barely covered my own rent, let alone his medical bills. A girl I knew from college told me about how much money she made dancing. It seemed like the only option at the time." "And what exactly did this dancing entail?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Because from what I saw in that video, it looked like more than just dancing." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You don't get to judge me. You have no idea what it was like. My father was dying, James. Dying. And there was a treatment that could have helped him, but it cost more money than I could make in 6 months of teaching. So yes, I danced. And sometimes I did private dances in the back rooms, but I never slept with anyone for money, if that's what you're implying." I wanted to believe her, but the image of her returning from the back room with disheveled hair haunted me. "How can I believe anything you say now? You've been lying to me since the day we met." "I haven't been lying about who I am. I didn't tell you about that part of my past because I was ashamed. Because I knew people would judge me, look at me differently, exactly like you're doing right now. You made me feel guilty for even wanting to live together before marriage because of your so-called traditional values. You acted like you were this virginal school teacher when all along you had been taking your clothes off for strange men." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I had gone too far. The hurt that flashed across her face made me regret my choice of words, but it was too late to take them back. "So that's what you really think of me," she said quietly. "After 3 years together, after everything we've shared, you find out one thing about my past, and suddenly I'm nothing but a stripper to you." "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is. It's exactly what you meant." She stood up straighter, wiping at a tear that had escaped despite her obvious effort to remain composed. "You know what the irony is, James? Those traditional values you're throwing in my face, they're real. They're a part of who I am, how I was raised. The fact that I had to set them aside for a period of my life when I was desperate doesn't make them any less genuine. If they were so genuine, you would have told me the truth from the beginning. We're supposed to get married in 2 weeks, Vanessa. Marriage is built on honesty. How could you keep something this significant from me for 3 years?" "Because I was afraid of exactly this reaction," she exclaimed. "I was afraid that the moment you knew, you would look at me differently, that everything else about me, everything real and genuine that we've built together, would suddenly mean nothing." And I was right, wasn't I? I ran a hand through my hair in frustration. "This isn't about your past, it's about the lie." "No, it's about both. If my past had been that I worked at a fast food restaurant and didn't tell you, you wouldn't be this upset. It's because of what I did, and you know it." She wasn't entirely wrong, and that realization made me uncomfortable. Was I judging her for her past more than for the deception itself? I need time to think, I said finally. The wedding is in 2 weeks, and I don't know if I can go through with it. The color drained from her face. Are you serious right now? You're considering calling off our wedding because of something I did before I even knew you, something I did to try to save my father's life. I'm considering calling off our wedding because you've been dishonest with me for our entire relationship. How can I trust you now? How can you trust me? She repeated incredulously. The same way I've trusted you with everything else in my life for the past 3 years. The same way I trusted you enough to agree to marry you, to plan a future with you. I made a mistake by not telling you about my past, yes, but it was a mistake born out of fear, not malice. I need time, I repeated, unable to process everything I was feeling. The hurt, the betrayal, the confusion, and beneath it all, a nagging voice asking if I was being fair, if I was judging her too harshly. Fine, she said, her voice cold now. Take all the time you need. But while you're thinking, remember this, the person you fell in love with, the person you proposed to, the person you've built a life with for the past 3 years. That's the real me, not the girl in that video. She was a desperate version of me doing what she had to do during the worst time of her life. She moved toward the door, then paused. And ask yourself this, James. If the situations were reversed, if you had done something in your past that you were ashamed of, something you did out of desperation, would I judge you this harshly? Would I throw away everything we have because of it? With that, she left, closing the door quietly behind her. The soft click, somehow more devastating than if she had slammed it. I stood in the silent apartment, her words echoing in my mind. Would she judge me as harshly? The honest answer was probably not. Vanessa had always been the more forgiving one in our relationship, the one who saw the best in people, who believed in second chances. But this felt different. This wasn't some minor transgression or mistake. This was a fundamental deception about who she was. Or was it? Was her past as a dancer truly a defining part of her identity, or just a chapter she had moved on from? I spent the rest of the day and most of the night wrestling with these questions. I called in sick to work the next day, unable to face the mundane normalcy of my job while my personal life was imploding. Vanessa didn't call or text, respecting my request for time, which somehow made me feel both relieved and abandoned. My phone did ring, however. Jackson, checking in. Have you talked to her? He asked without preamble when I answered. Yes. And I told her I need time to think. The wedding is in 2 weeks, Jackson. I can't just pretend this didn't happen. He sighed heavily. Look, I get it. Finding out something like this is a shock. But man, Vanessa loves you. Like, really loves you, and from what I can see, you love her too. Are you really going to throw that away because she didn't tell you about a job she had during a desperate time in her life? It's not just about the job, it's about the lie. Yeah, you keep saying that. But here's the thing, everyone has things in their past they're not proud of. Things they'd rather leave behind. Vanessa chose to leave that part of her life behind to become someone better. Someone worthy of the kind of love you two have. Can you honestly say you've told her every single thing about your past? Every mistake, every regret, every moment of shame. His words hit home. There were things in my past I wasn't proud of either. Nothing as dramatic as dancing in a club, but moments of weakness, poor decisions, regrets. I hadn't told Vanessa about the time in college when I got so drunk I cheated on my girlfriend at the time. Or about the summer after high school when my friends and I would steal liquor from their parents and get wasted in the park, once nearly getting arrested. Small things compared to her secret, perhaps, but things I had chosen not to share because they didn't reflect who I was now. It's different, I said, but my conviction was wavering. Is it? Or are you just holding her to a higher standard because it's easier than admitting you might be overreacting? I didn't have an answer for that. Just think about it, Jackson continued when I remained silent. Really think about what you're about to throw away and why. And for what it's worth, I've known Vanessa for years, longer than you have. She's one of the most genuine, kind-hearted people I've ever met. What she did back then doesn't change who she is now. After we hung up, I found myself opening my laptop again. But this time, instead of rewatching the video, I found myself looking at photos of Vanessa and me over the past 3 years. Hiking in the mountains, her smile radiant as she pointed out a family of deer in the distance. At my sister's wedding, dancing close, her head on my shoulder. In the kitchen of my apartment, flour on her nose as she attempted to bake my favorite cookies. On one knee by the lake, proposing as tears of joy streamed down her face. In each photo, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with. The woman who volunteered at animal shelters on weekends, who stayed up all night with my niece when she had the flu so my sister could get some rest, who wrote me love notes and hid them in my lunch when I was having a tough week at work. Was that woman any less real because of what she had done before we met? The next morning I called her. "Can we talk?" "Yes," she said, her voice cautious. "Where?" "The lake, our spot." "In an hour," she agreed, and exactly 1 hour later, I saw her sitting on the bench where we had shared so many conversations where I had proposed. She wore jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes, but still beautiful in that unassuming way that had always captivated me. I sat beside her, leaving a space between us. For a while, we both stared out at the water, watching ducks glide across the surface, leaving ripples in their wake. "I've been thinking," I finally said, breaking the silence, "about us, about what happened." And her voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "I'm still hurt, Vanessa. I won't pretend I'm not. Finding out something like this, especially in the way I did just weeks before our wedding, it's a lot to process." She nodded, not looking at me. "I understand. But I've also been thinking about what you said, about who you are versus what you did, about whether I'm judging you unfairly." Now she turned to face me, hope flickering in her eyes. "And what did you decide?" "I decided that I don't know who sent me that video, but whoever it was, they wanted to destroy us. They wanted me to see you as nothing more than what was shown in those few minutes of footage. To erase 3 years of knowing you, loving you, building a life with you." I took a deep breath. And I almost let them succeed. I almost threw away everything we have because I was shocked and hurt and felt betrayed. But the truth is, everyone has parts of their past they're not proud of. Everyone has things they'd rather leave behind. You're not that person in the video anymore if you ever really were. You're the woman I fell in love with. The woman who has shown me what true love and partnership looks like for the past 3 years. Tears were falling freely down her face now. "Does that mean?" "It means I love you, Vanessa. It means I want to marry you, not the idea of you I had in my head, but the real you, with all your complexities and past mistakes and the choices you had to make in difficult times." "I should have told you," she said, wiping at her tears. "I know that now. I was just so afraid of losing you, of seeing that look in your eyes, the one you had when you showed me the video, like you didn't know me anymore. I wish you had trusted me enough to tell me, but I understand why you didn't. Fear makes us do things we wouldn't normally do, like keeping secrets from people we love, or judging them too harshly when we discover those secrets." She reached for my hand tentatively, and I took hers, squeezing gently. "So where do we go from here?" "Forward," I said simply, "together. With honesty, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." "Does that mean the wedding is still on?" I hesitated, not because I was uncertain about wanting to marry her, but because I wasn't sure if we could heal this rift in just 2 weeks. "I think we should postpone it. Not because I don't want to marry you, but because I think we need time to rebuild what was broken, to make sure we're starting our marriage on the right foundation." She nodded, disappointment evident in her eyes, but acceptance too. "That makes sense. We can call the vendors today, let our families know. And in the meantime, I think we should talk to someone, a counselor, to help us navigate this and make sure we're communicating properly." "I'd like that," she said softly. We sat in silence for a while longer, hands intertwined, watching the lake shimmer in the midday sun. It wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. There would be moments of doubt, questions, perhaps even arguments as we worked through this. But as I sat there with her, I knew with certainty that what we had was worth fighting for. "There's one more thing," I said, turning to face her fully. "I want to know who sent that video. Not because it changes anything between us now, but because whoever it was clearly wanted to hurt us, and I want to understand why." Vanessa's expression darkened. "I have an idea who it might have been. There was a guy at the club, a regular customer who became obsessed with me. He asked me out repeatedly, wouldn't take no for an answer. When I left the club, he found out where I lived, started showing up at my apartment. I had to get a restraining order against him. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. And you think he's been watching you all this time, waiting for a moment to sabotage your happiness? It's possible. His name is Robert Kellen. The restraining order expired a year ago. I haven't seen him since I left the club, but that doesn't mean he hasn't been watching from a distance." The name didn't ring any bells, but the thought of someone stalking Vanessa, harboring such malice toward her for years, filled me with both anger and concern. "We should go to the police." "And tell them what? That someone sent you a video of me dancing at a club 4 years ago. It's creepy and malicious, but I don't think it's illegal." She had a point. "Still, if this guy has been stalking you for years, that's something they should know about. Especially with the wedding coming up, or postponed now. I'll call tomorrow, file a report, but in the meantime, I think we should be careful. If it is Robert, he's unpredictable. And now that his first attempt to drive us apart didn't work, he might try something else." The thought sent a chill down my spine. What had begun as a painful discovery about Vanessa's past had now evolved into something potentially more sinister. Someone out there wanted to destroy our relationship, maybe even harm Vanessa, and they had almost succeeded. "We'll be careful," I promised. "And we'll face whatever comes next together." She leaned her head on my shoulder, a familiar gesture that felt both comforting and strange given everything that had happened. "Together," she echoed. As we sat there by the lake, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a larger storm. The anonymous envelope, the carefully curated video designed to show Vanessa in the worst possible light, the timing just weeks before our wedding. It all felt too deliberate, too planned. Whoever had sent it had waited for the perfect moment to cause maximum damage. But they had underestimated one thing, the strength of what Vanessa and I had built together over 3 years. It wasn't perfect, and yes, there had been deception. But beneath that was a foundation of genuine love, respect, and partnership that couldn't be destroyed by a single revelation, no matter how shocking. We would face whatever came next, together. The next day, we began the process of notifying our guests about the postponement. It was difficult. Explaining without really explaining, fielding concerned questions from family and friends. We decided on a simple story. With everything going on in our lives right now, we felt we needed more time to prepare for such an important step. Most people accepted this with minimal questioning, though I could tell my parents and Vanessa's mother suspected there was more to the story. Jackson was the only one who knew the truth, and he was supportive of our decision to postpone rather than cancel. "This is the right call," he assured me when I called to let him know. "Take the time you need to work through this. The love you guys have is worth fighting for." Vanessa went to the police as promised, filing a report about her suspicions regarding Robert Kellen. The officer who took her statement was sympathetic but not particularly optimistic about what they could do. Without concrete evidence that Kellen was the one who sent the video or that he posed a current threat, their hands were tied. They promised to keep the report on file and advised Vanessa to document any further suspicious activity. We also scheduled our first appointment with a couples counselor for the following week. In the meantime, we agreed to give each other a little space to process everything. Vanessa stayed with her mother while I remained in my apartment, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions I was still cycling through. 3 days after our conversation by the lake, I received another envelope. Same handwriting, same lack of return address. My heart raced as I tore it open, half expecting another USB drive with more damning footage. Instead, I found a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "She's still lying to you. Ask her about July 15th, 2018. Ask her about the baby." I stared at the paper, reading and rereading those two sentences until they blurred before my eyes. July 15th, 2018. That would have been about 6 months before Vanessa and I met, and a baby, what baby? My first instinct was to call Vanessa immediately to demand answers. But I stopped myself, remembering how close I had come to losing her by reacting without thinking. This was exactly what the sender wanted, to sow more discord between us, to make me doubt her all over again. Instead, I called Jackson. "I got another message," I told him, explaining the contents. "Jesus," he muttered. "This is getting serious, man. Someone is really out to get you guys. I need to know, did Vanessa ever mention anything to you about a baby or something significant happening in July 2018? There was a pause, long enough to make my stomach clench with dread. "It's not my place to tell you this, but given the circumstances." "Yeah, something happened that summer. But it's Vanessa's story to tell, not mine. You need to talk to her, and you need to do it with an open mind and an open heart." His cryptic response did nothing to ease my anxiety. "So there is something else she's been keeping from me." "It's not like that, James. Some things are just too painful to talk about, too personal. This isn't about deception, it's about pain." I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing with possibilities. Had Vanessa been pregnant? Had she had a child she never told me about, given up a baby for adoption? The possibilities were endless, and each one more unsettling than the last. I called her. "We need to talk, in person, it's important. Is everything okay?" The concern in her voice was palpable. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Can you come over?" She arrived 30 minutes later, looking worried. I handed her the paper wordlessly, watching her face as she read it. The color drained from her cheeks, and for a moment I thought she might faint. She sank onto the couch, the paper trembling in her hands. "Vanessa," I prompted gently when she remained silent, staring at the paper. "I was going to tell you," she whispered. "After we worked through the other issue, I was going to tell you everything." I sat beside her, keeping a distance between us. "Tell me now, please." She took a deep breath, placing the paper on the coffee table as if she couldn't bear to touch it anymore. "In July 2018, I was still dancing at the club. I was also dating someone, a guy named Michael. He knew what I did for work, said he was fine with it. We were together for about 6 months when I found out I was pregnant." My heart constricted at the confirmation, but I remained silent, letting her continue. "I was scared, but also happy in a way. I'd always wanted to be a mother, just not like this, not in those circumstances. But I thought maybe this was a sign, a reason to get out of the club, to start fresh. Michael seemed excited too at first. He talked about us getting a place together, about me quitting dancing. For a few weeks, I let myself believe that it could work, that we could be a family." She paused, closing her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, they were filled with a pain so raw it made my chest ache. "Then I started having complications. Bleeding, cramps. The doctor said the pregnancy was at risk, that I needed bed rest. I couldn't dance anymore, which meant no income. Michael, he changed almost overnight. Suddenly, he wasn't sure he was ready to be a father. He started staying out late, coming home drunk. One night, I confronted him, and he admitted he'd been cheating on me for most of our relationship. I reached for her hand without thinking, and she gripped mine tightly. The stress, the heartbreak, it was too much. I lost the baby 2 days later, July 15th. Her voice broke on the date. I was alone in the apartment when it happened. Michael had moved out, taken most of our money with him. I couldn't even afford an ambulance, so I called a cab to take me to the emergency room. Tears were streaming down her face now. The doctor said sometimes these things just happen, that it wasn't my fault, but I couldn't help feeling like it was. Like if I had made different choices, lived a different life, maybe my baby would have survived. I moved closer, putting my arm around her as she cried. All the hurt and betrayal I had felt over her keeping her dancing passed from me seemed trivial compared to the pain she was reliving now. After I lost the baby, I fell into a deep depression. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the club, but I had bills to pay, medical expenses. That's when Robert Kellen offered to help me. He was a regular at the club, always tipped well, seemed nice enough. He offered to pay my rent for a few months, no strings attached, he said, just until I got back on my feet. She laughed bitterly. I was desperate enough to believe him. But of course, there were strings. He started showing up at my apartment at all hours, bringing gifts I never asked for, expecting me to be grateful. When I finally realized what he wanted in return, I told him I wasn't interested. That's when he changed, became obsessive, threatening. "Why didn't you go to the police then?" I asked gently. I did eventually, but at first I was too scared. He knew things about me, about my time at the club. He threatened to tell my family, to ruin me if I didn't give him what he wanted. When I stood my ground, he started stalking me. Following me to job interviews, showing up at the grocery store, leaving notes on my car. That's when I finally got the restraining order. She wiped at her tears, composing herself. After that, I moved to a new apartment, got the teaching job, and tried to put it all behind me. A few months later, I met you. And for the first time since losing the baby, I felt like maybe I could have a normal life, be happy again. I pulled her closer, my heart breaking for everything she had endured. "I'm so sorry you went through all of that alone. I wish I could have been there for you. You're here now," she said softly. "That's what matters." We sat in silence for a while, processing everything that had been revealed, the dancing, the pregnancy, the stalker. It was a lot to take in, but strangely, I felt closer to Vanessa now than I had before. There were no more secrets between us, no more hidden pain. "So Robert Kellen is definitely the one sending these messages," I said finally. "He's trying to break us up." "It has to be him. No one else knew about the baby except Michael, and he moved to Seattle years ago. He wouldn't care enough to try to sabotage my life now." I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "We need to go back to the police with this. This letter proves he's still stalking you, still trying to control your life. This isn't just about our relationship anymore, Vanessa. This man is dangerous." "You're right," she agreed, straightening her shoulders with new resolve. "No more hiding, no more running, we face this together." The next day, we went to the police station with both the USB drive and the letter. The officer who had taken Vanessa's previous report was more concerned this time, seeing the pattern of stalking behavior that had persisted over years. They promised to investigate Robert Kellen, to question him about the messages. 2 days later, we received a call from the detective assigned to our case. They had brought Kellen in for questioning, and while he initially denied everything, they had found evidence in his apartment linking him to the messages. A computer with copies of the video files, printouts of information about me and our wedding plans, even photographs of Vanessa taken without her knowledge over the past few months. He was being charged with stalking and harassment, and the detective advised us to file for another restraining order immediately, which we did. It was a relief to know he was being held accountable, but also deeply unsettling to realize how closely he had been watching us, how determined he had been to destroy our happiness. If I hadn't stopped to think, to talk to Vanessa instead of simply reacting to what I had seen in that first video, he might have succeeded. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa and I continued our counseling sessions, working through the aftermath of these revelations. We decided to keep the wedding postponed for 6 months, giving ourselves time to heal and rebuild. Our families were understanding once we explained that we had been through a difficult time and wanted to make sure our foundation was strong before taking this important step. Slowly, the trust between us grew stronger than it had been before. In a strange way, Robert Kellen's attempts to tear us apart had only brought us closer together. We had faced the worst of each other's past and present and chosen to stay, to love each other through it all. 6 months later, we stood together at the same lake where I had proposed, where we had decided to postpone our wedding. But this time, We were surrounded by our closest friends and family, exchanging vows in a ceremony that felt more meaningful for all we had overcome to reach this day. For better or worse, I promised her, sliding the ring onto her finger. In truth and honesty, she added, her eyes shining with tears of joy as she placed my ring on my hand. As we sealed our vows with a kiss, I knew that what we had built together was stronger than any secret, any lie, any attempt to break us apart. We had faced the storms together and emerged stronger, our love tested and proven true. In the end, that was all that mattered. Robert Kellen received a 3-year sentence for stalking and harassment with mandatory psychological counseling. Vanessa and I moved to a new city where she continued teaching and I transferred to a new branch of my company. We rarely spoke of the past anymore, not because it was taboo, but because we had processed it, accepted it as part of our journey, and moved forward together. 2 years into our marriage, Vanessa became pregnant again. This time, there were no complications, no shadows from the past to darken our joy. Our daughter, Lily, was born healthy and strong, a symbol of our new beginning, of the future we had fought so hard to protect. As I watch Vanessa now, singing our daughter to sleep in the nursery we painted together, I think about how close I came to losing this, to letting fear and judgment destroy the most beautiful thing in my life. I think about how easy it is to judge someone based on a fragment of their past, to forget that we are all more than our worst moments, our biggest mistakes. I'm grateful every day that I found the courage to listen, to understand, to forgive. Because in doing so, I discovered that the woman I love is even stronger, more resilient, and more deserving of love than I had ever known. And that knowledge makes every day, every moment of our life together, infinitely more precious.